You know that feeling when you wake up and something's just off? Not the "I forgot to set my alarm" kind of off. The deeper kind. The kind where the air in your own bedroom feels like it belongs to someone else. That was my Tuesday. The sun was slicing through the blinds at the wrong angle, like the house had rotated a few degrees on its foundation overnight. My clock, a cheap digital thing I've had since college, read 8:17 a.m., but the light was all wrong for 8:17. It was the long, lazy, late afternoon light. The kind that throws shadows you can get lost in. I blinked the grit from my eyes and reached for my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't there. Just a faint, cool patch in the dust where it should have been. A low thrum of anxiety started up in my chest. "Okay, relax," I muttered to the empty room. My voice sounded thin, stripped of its usual resonance. "You probably knocked it off in your sleep." I swung my legs out of bed, the floorboards groaning a complaint that was familiar yet somehow questioning. Like even the house was unsure. I padded out to the kitchen, my bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood. The coffee maker, a relic I'd programmed to have a fresh pot waiting for me by 8:15, was dark and silent. No warm, bitter scent to greet me, just the stale smell of yesterday's grounds. That's when I saw it. The calendar on the wall, the one with the cutesy pictures of kittens my sister sent me every Christmas. It was flipped to the wrong month. It should have been October, a fat orange pumpkin staring back at me. Instead, a sleek black panther for December was there, its green eyes seeming to track me as I moved. My breath hitched. This was a prank. It had to be. My buddy Mike must have gotten a key, messed with my stuff after a night of one too many beers. A stupid, elaborate prank. I marched to the front door, intent on checking the mailbox, on proving it was still Tuesday, still October. I yanked the door open, and the world outside was gone. Not destroyed, not post-apocalyptic, just gone. Where my front yard should have been, where Mrs. Henderson's meticulously manicured rose bushes across the street usually stood, there was nothing but a flat, uniform, pearlescent gray. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't fog. It was an absence. A void that stretched to infinity, swallowing light and sound. The only sound was the frantic jackhammer thumping of my own heart. I stumbled back, slamming the door so hard the frame shuddered. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers slick with a cold sweat. Leaning my forehead against the cool wood, I tried to breathe. This is a dream. A really, really vivid dream. I pinched the soft skin of my forearm hard. A sharp, bright pain flared, and a red welt rose immediately. Not a dream. The windows. I had to check the windows. I ran to the living room, my heart in my throat. The large picture window that looked out onto the street presented the same view. An endless, silent, gray nothing. It was like my house, my little two-bedroom bungalow, had been neatly excised from reality and placed on a blank canvas. Panic, cold and sharp, began to drill into my spine. A systematic, terrified search of the house revealed the full extent of the nightmare. Every door and window that led outside opened onto that same impossible void. The back door, the basement bulkhead, the small bathroom window, all of it. Gray. My phone was gone. The landline, a joke I kept for emergencies, emitted only a hollow, empty static. The internet was down. The television screens were a chaotic mess of black and white fizzing snow. And when I turned the dial on the radio, all I got was that same hissing silence broken only by faint, ghostly whispers that vanished the second I tried to focus on them. I was alone. Profoundly, cosmically alone. The first day, if it was a day, was defined by a screaming primal terror. I paced. I pounded on the walls until my fists were bruised. I screamed until my voice was a ragged shred. The gray outside didn't react. It didn't ripple or change. It just was. An impenetrable, silent judge to my breakdown. By what I guessed was the second day, the terror had curdled into a numb, grinding dread. My body was still on a schedule. I was hungry. I was thirsty. I raided the pantry, my movements robotic. A can of chicken noodle soup, a handful of crackers that tasted like dust. The food was there. The water still ran from the taps, but it felt like a taunt, a temporary reprieve before the real horror began. And it was then that I noticed the first change inside the house. I was staring at the family photos on the mantelpiece, trying to anchor myself in a memory that felt a million miles away. There was one of me and my parents at my college graduation, My mom's arm was around me, her smile wide and proud. I reached out to trace the glass, and I froze. In the photo, my mother's face was slightly blurred, as if she'd been moving, but that wasn't right. I remembered that photo being perfectly clear. I was the one who'd taken it with a timer. We were all statue still, grinning like fools. I pulled my hand back as if burned. My eyes darted to another photo, one of me and Mike on a fishing trip. Mike's familiar goofy grin was there, but his eyes were just dark smudges, empty pits. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I was losing my mind. The isolation was breaking me. That night, the whispers from the radio grew louder. I huddled on the couch, a blanket pulled up to my chin, listening. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language I knew. They were sibilant, slithering sounds that seemed to coil in the air, speaking of forgotten places and a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. And then, clear as a bell, a single word cut through the static. Acknowledge. I jerked upright, my blood turning to ice water. The voice was flat, electronic, and utterly devoid of life. The third day, the changes became more aggressive. I woke up to find the titles on my bookshelf had rearranged themselves. They weren't in alphabetical order or by genre. They formed sentences. "The house is not the walls," one shelf read. "You are the door," said another. My copy of Moby Dick was now simply titled, "Listen." The photos had degraded further. In the graduation picture, my mother's face was now completely featureless, a smooth, pale oval. My father was starting to blur at the edges. In the fishing photo, Mike was just a silhouette against a blazing sun. The worst was a painting I'd bought from a street artist in New Orleans. The vibrant jazz club scene was now muted, the colors leaching away, and the figures of the musicians were melting, their instruments warping into shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. The house itself was groaning more, but the groans had changed. They were no longer the sounds of an old structure settling. They were wet, organic sounds, gurgles. The sound of something thick and heavy being dragged across the floor in the room. Above me, when I knew I was the only one here. I was in the kitchen trying to force down a piece of bread when the faucet turned itself on. Not a drip. The full force of the cold water blasting into the sink. I stared at it, paralyzed. And then the water changed. It thickened, turning a deep, cloudy red. A coppery, metallic smell filled the air. The smell of blood. It gushed for a full minute before sputtering and returning to clear, cold water. That was the moment the last vestiges of my sanity began to unravel. This wasn't just isolation. This wasn't me going mad. The house was alive. And it was turning against me. Or worse, it was digesting me. The whispers were constant now, a chorus of dead voices in my ears. They spoke of the tenant and the threshold. They told me I had strayed from the pattern. I didn't know what any of it meant. I just knew I was trapped in a cage that was slowly shrinking, a reality that was rewriting itself with me as the protagonist in a story I never wanted to be in. On the fourth day, I found the first hole. It was in the hallway just outside my bedroom door. A patch of the wall about the size of a dinner plate had simply vanished, not broken, not crumbled. It was just gone, revealing not the wooden studs and insulation behind it, but that same endless pearlescent gray. The void was no longer outside. It was breaking in. I backed away, a low moan escaping my lips. I ran to the living room, only to find another hole in the ceiling, a perfect circle through which the grayness stared down like a blind eye. The house was dissolving around me. The final horror began that night. I was trying to sleep, curled into a tight ball on the couch, when I felt a strange sensation in my left hand, a tingling numbness. I held it up in the sliver of moonlight. Coming through the window, the moon was still there. A pale ghost in the void, another impossible taunt. The tips of my fingers were transparent. I could see the faint outline of the couch cushion through them. I wiggled them, and the movement felt distant, fuzzy, like a radio signal fading in and out. I scrambled to the bathroom, fumbling for the light switch. The face that stared back at me from the mirror was not my own. Oh, it had my features, my messy brown hair, my tired blue eyes, but it was faded. Like an old photograph left in the sun. The color was leaching from my skin, my irises becoming pale, washed-out versions of themselves. I was becoming a ghost in my own home. The whispers confirmed it. "Assimilation!" they hissed, 100 voices speaking as one. "The pattern consumes. You are becoming of the house. You are becoming of the silence. I was the house. The house was me. Its dissolution was my own. The fading photos, the warping books, the groaning pipes, they weren't just changes to my environment. They were symptoms. I was being edited out of existence, my memories, my identity, my very physical form being rewritten to fit this new sterile reality. Driven by a final, desperate surge of animal instinct, I did the one thing I'd been too terrified to do. I went to the front door. The void was no longer just outside. It was inside me. I could feel its cold, blank emptiness spreading through my veins. My hand, now almost completely translucent, reached for the doorknob. I didn't open it to escape. There was no escape. That was the final crushing understanding. I opened it to accept, to meet my end head-on. The door swung open. The gray was there, but it was different now. It wasn't an external force. It felt like home, the only home left. I took a step forward over the threshold. The moment my foot, now barely more than a shimmer in the air, touched the void, the last of the physical sensation vanished. There was no cold, no heat, no wind. There was nothing. I turned back to look at the house one last time. But there was no house. There was only the gray. It had already been consumed. I had consumed it, or it had consumed me. The distinction was meaningless now. The last thing I felt was not fear nor sadness. It was a profound, deafening silence, vaster than any ocean. The whispers stopped. The hum of the world was gone. My thoughts themselves began to unravel, single words breaking apart into letters, the letters dissolving into meaningless dots of light, and then nothing. I am not, I am nowhere, I am nothing. And yet, I am aware. A new sound begins, faint at first, then growing. It's a digital chirping, a familiar grating melody. My alarm clock, a deep, shuddering breath fills my lungs. The smell of my own bedroom, dust and laundry and sleep, is overwhelming. My eyes snap open. The sun is slicing through the blinds at the wrong angle. It's the long, lazy, late afternoon light. My heart seizes in my chest. I don't want to look. I don't want to know. But my head turns, slowly, mechanically, toward the nightstand. My phone is gone. Just a faint, cool patch in the dust. And on the wall, the calendar with the kittens has flipped. A sleek black panther for December stares back at me, its green eyes knowing. A whisper, so faint it might be my own imagination, coils through the room. It's a single word dripping with a cold, ancient satisfaction. Again.